Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bronx Music Heritage Center. My name is Elena Martinez, and I'm one of the artistic directors here. Welcome to the premiere show of our new series, Music by the Book. We're really excited to start this new series. Personally, for me, I'm not a musician, but I work with musicians and present music programs all the time. And I'm really interested in the other folks who make up sort of the universe of our music world, right? It's not just the musicians. There's the promoters, the instrument makers, the record store owners, and also the DJs and the authors who write about this music and who study the music. So this series will be delving into interviews with authors on different topics related to music. So I'm going to give you to our other artistic director, Bobby Sanabria, so he can introduce tonight's guest. But before we start, I just want to have the Bronx Music Heritage Center shout out to our funders. Our programming here at the Bronx Music Heritage Center is supported in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, public fund from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the Louis Auchincloss Foundation, and the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund. And with that, take it away, Bobby Sanabria.
Once again, my name is Bobby Sanabria. I was muted there. I'm sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen, but welcome to tonight's first edition of Music by the Book. And right here on the place to be, the BMHC, the Bronx Music Heritage Center. I'd like to thank my co-artistic director, Elena Martinez, for introducing tonight's festivities and congratulate her because it was her idea to do this fascinating series. And for our first guest, we have a distinguished one indeed. In 1995, Sheila Anderson joined the staff of WBGO Newark 88.3 FM, the #1 jazz station in the entire nation, where she hosts weekend jazz after hours, salon sessions, and Sunday night music mix. She has authored 4 books: The Quotable Musician, From Bach to Tupac, The Little Red Book of Musicians' Wisdom, How to Grow as a Musician, What All Musicians Must Know to Succeed. The second edition was published in November 2019. A festival producer, her work includes being the curator of the Newark Museum of Art Jazz in the Garden series, a Columbia University Community Scholar in 2017, and an inaugural Dan Morgenstern Fellow by the Institute of Jazz Studies at Rutgers-Newark in 2020. Ms. Anderson is an alumna of Baruch College, City University of New York, with a bachelor's degree in English and resides in Harlem. So please welcome to Music by the Book, the one and only, the Queen of Hang, Ms. Sheila Anderson. Sheila, it's great to see you. It's great to hear you.
Yeah, Bobby, it's so good. I'm so glad. Thank you for allowing me to be the first of this series. I like being the first sometimes.
Fantastic. We have a lot to discuss tonight, and I'd like to remind everybody that's tuned in right now that you can ask Miss Anderson questions through the chat. So once we get going, you can start asking questions, and I'll definitely relay them to her. But first of all, Sheila, you've been in radio, in jazz radio since 1995, and jazz radio has changed over the years. But the first thing I'd like to ask you is your moniker, the Queen of Hang. I first met you through the club scene, working in New York City as a musician, and you and a few other of the announcers at WBGO are unique in the fact that you actually go out to really check out the musicians as much as you possibly can, and that's how I first met you. And but who gave you this moniker, the Queen of Hang?
Well, it was Michael Bourne, and he's for those who don't know, he's the host of the Blues Hour and also the host of Singers Unlimited. So when I started on BGO, I sort of had a gap. I had a gap in my knowledge. I thought, about the music, and I wanted to learn more about the music from the musicians. I asked my boss if I could do interviews on Sunday morning because I was on 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. before Michael Bourne. And so he said no. But I had already gone through the certification to do a TV show on Manhattan Network, but I couldn't figure out how to really make the show I wanted a reality. So I said, well, I'll do a jazz show. I'll interview musicians on my TV show. And I said, but I don't really know enough musicians. So I said, well, I've got to meet musicians. And I went to Bradley's and started introducing myself and asking the very famous club that's no longer here. But I decided I was working in publishing full time. I was a production person, and I'd been doing production for a long time, and then I went into sales, but that's another story. So I immersed myself in the jazz community. I sort of put myself on a hangout schedule. I'd get off work Monday, I go to the Musicians Union for the jam session. Then I go to Wells for the Harlem Renaissance Band. And then I go to end the night at St. Nick's Pub for their jam session. I walk home. So those years, you could go to 4 clubs in a night. But long story short, I would always, after I got off on Sunday morning, I would spend time talking to Michael Bourne, and and then I ended up like being the secretary. When he would interview people, I'd open the door. It was great. But he would ask me if I'd been somewhere, and I said, oh yeah, I'd been there. Or he says, either you've been there or you're going. So I bought a car, and I'm driving up 10th Avenue. I think when I was in the city, and he said somebody announced that somebody was going to be somewhere, and he was wrong. So I called him up. I said, hey, Michael, so-and-so is at, I think, the Vanguard, whatever. So he got back on the air and he said, I misspoke. Sheila Anderson, the queen of hang, called to tell me that so-and-so is at such and such, and she would know. And that's how I got the queen of, and it stuck. I mean, I really didn't, I really wasn't sure if that was a good moniker, because, some people thinking hanging of just like hanging, just sort of just wasting time, as it were. But, I used that was my classroom, sitting at the bar, talking to musicians and hearing musicians, talk about the music. And so when I would interview them on my TV show, I would say things like, so what does it mean so-and-so didn't play the changes? So what does it mean? Can you explain this? So I would, ask them to, really go into depth about things that, I was learning, at the bar, not just getting to know them personally, but also, what the music was about. And plus funny stories, history. I mean, musicians are fun. At least some musicians are fun. Not all musicians are fun.
Well, I must say, I've always told my students throughout the years, invariably, they ask you questions like, well, how do I learn this? How do I learn that? He goes, well, what it boils down to is you got to hang. You got to hang out. You got to experience the music in the clubs. I could teach you from an academic, technical point of view in the classroom, but really where you learn is on the bandstand or watching others on the bandstand. So you got to hang. So indeed, you are very much like a musician in that.
Well,
in
I
every
wanted
sense
to
of the
be
word.
Bobby. I wanted to be.
You're
I
kidding.
wanted to be. I wanted to be Bobby Humphrey. I was a flautist.
No
And
kidding.
yeah. And I was, I wasn't. I could read. I can still, if I hear it, I can play it. I can read music a little bit, but I'm really bad at improvisation. So when I moved to New York, I would kind of play in weddings and stuff like that. But I kind of knew I didn't have what it took to really be a working musician. And then in my teen years, I got involved with the NAACP. So that took me away from really focusing on my music. But I did want to be a musician. So I
Wow.
guess my life kind of come. I guess I'm living my dream. You know what I mean? To be able to be on the radio and also, be around music and jazz and people. So I guess I'm living my dream.
Well, we got to
You could
get you
say
some
that.
t-shirt. We got to get you some t-shirts to say Queen of Hang. I mean,
All right. All right. People keep telling me I got to get some swag.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got to get some swag.
Now, talking about you wanted to be a musician. You played flute at one time, etc. You got involved with the NAACP. How did you get involved in jazz radio? And to the point that you've
Well,
become one of the most well-known jazz radio personalities, not only in the New York area but across the country.
I started to volunteer in 1987.
Is that WBGO?
I at WBGO. I've always been a volunteer person, and I was not happy with the work I was doing. So I was always looking for something else to do. I went to bartending school. My mother was urgent. I went to modeling school. She said, Sheila, you have great legs. You need to go to modeling school and model your legs the way people model their hands. And my mother was very, very creative. She was amazing. So I started. I called Alina Bloomgarden, who was doing jazz at Lincoln Center, but it didn't. I forgot what the name was. It wasn't jazz at Lincoln Center. And I called her up and I said, I'd like to volunteer. And she said, but it's just me. She said, what you should do is volunteer for the Philharmonic because they have a volunteer program. So I did the night program. I didn't really enjoy it or the people for that matter. So when I joined WBGO, they asked me if I wanted to be a volunteer. I said yes. So they called me like December of 86 or whatever it was and said, would you want to volunteer for the next fund drive? I said, yeah. So that was February of 87, and I volunteered for Felix Hernandez. And then I started to meet so many great people at the station that I was just like there all the time. So after several years, one of the announcers who's no longer there suggested that I talk to Gary and Thurston about being on the air. So we need more women on the air. And I said, really?
When you say Gary and Thurston, you're talking about
Gary
Gary
Walker
Walker, who
and
is
Thurston Briscoe, who was the program director at that time. And they said, yeah, you can learn the board. You had to learn the board. And I went in. The station was in a bit of chaos, so they didn't really care if I was there or not, really. And then I started helping my friend Harvey, who was doing the cleaning. I would help him clean. I needed the extra money. I wasn't proud. I was like, come on. Plus, I loved hanging with Harvey because he was my friend, and we would go check out the music. So when a year and a half went by, and I said to Thurston, I said, I can do the Sunday morning show now. I'm really. I asked for Sunday morning because I figured that was the show that was always in need of a host. I didn't like mornings. So then Thurston blew me off, and my feelings were hurt for a little while. And then I said, Sheila, you came here to volunteer. You didn't come here to be on the air. So I kept volunteering. Year and a half goes by. And when Alfredo Cruz left, he was doing the Latin Jazz Cruise, and Will was doing Sunday Morning Harmony. They then needed a host. And Thurston said, you came in and made a tape. I said, yeah, I did. He said, can you do the Sunday morning show temporarily until I find someone? I said, yeah. And this is really the Reader's Digest version. But, on the back of my mind, I was really, my announcing was horrible. I had to go, and he wouldn't put me on right away. So I would go get off work in the city, get public transportation. 3 times a week, I would go to the station. I pulled out albums, records, everything, because the format was piano, guitar, no horns. And announcers would give me music to listen to. So I would make tapes listening to the music and making notes on the music. So I would just make notes, what I like, what I didn't like, and then I would do the announcing part. And finally, I gave Gary, I asked everybody, listen to my tape. And then finally Thurston said sounded good enough to be on the air. Then he asked me to do the overnight, February 15th. And I said, Thurston, will somebody be there with me? He said, oh, yeah. The person who was with me was Harvey Wise, who was cleaning down the hall. So, I literally, I was there I was shaking, scared.
That's always the tell when you ask somebody, is there somebody going to be there with me, or will they be able somebody there be to help me? And they always say, oh yeah, no problem. That means nobody's going to be there. Yeah. Do you remember one thing I must ask you? Do you remember what the very first recording was that you played on the air? Do you remember?
I think it was Red Clay. I knew I did Red Clay. I played Nancy Wilson and Cannonball Adderley. Um,
Red Clay by Freddie Hubbard.
yes, and
Because
Cannonball.
we have a lot of viewers on this uh, here that are not necessarily familiar with jazz. So we have to. It's always nice to inform them some of the things you're talking about. So
Well, when I started Sunday Morning Harmony, I started with Lil Darlin', Ray Brown, Gene Harris,
uh,
Jeff Hamilton, and it was going to be my theme song. But Thurston told me not to do a theme song because it was. He said, "Don't take up so much time. It's like wasting time. Just So I was like, oh, okay." But a friend of mine, Natalie, made a cassette tape of my first show, Sunday Morning Harmony, including the time leading up to it when Michael Anderson was like, "Sheila, are you ready?" So she captured all of that, which was really great. Which I need to convert to a DVD before the tape runs out. But I do. But I was so nervous. I had laryngitis for like 3 weeks, and Michael Boyd, "What's the matter? You got hysterical laryngitis?" I said, "Yeah." I literally lost my voice, which I'd never done before or even after, unless I was sick or something. I was that scared. I was really, people, folks were really mean to me. The listeners, they were mean. Everybody's mean to me because I really was such a horrible announcer.
you mean
People would tell me,
they would send letters or just personally call you
they would
or
send letters, they would call me on the phone because we used to answer the phone because the ringer would cut off when the mic was on. So, and then if you wanted
wow.
to pick up, well, at your own peril.
I, I've, I,
They
I've
told
called
me my
you.
music sucked. Huh?
I've called you, you many times saying, man, the show is smoking and you're playing
Oh,
some great stuff,
right. That's before they got a new phone system. We actually pick up the phone, but
Right.
yeah. But that was, like I said, it took a lot. A lot of growing pains, but I was determined. I was gonna learn. And I got so into it. It was just really. I love doing Sunday morning. I love doing radio, but Sunday Morning Harmony was special because I had to give the fullness of the music with a limited instrumentation musically.
Right.
So how to make it creative. And horn people say, "What do you mean there's no horns?" I said, "Just listen to the show." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I didn't even miss the horns. I thought maybe when I was in the bathroom, and and also pacing on how to pace the music. Yeah, I learned from musicians, but also people will call and tell me, basically like, this woman called and she said she had a really high pitched voice that everything I played sound the same. And she said, something about, and I said, it's 6:30 in the morning or whatever. And she said, "Some of us have been up all night and we want to swing." Okay. Now this is before internet, so it wasn't
Right,
like
right, right.
somebody's morning. So I thought about it, and I thought about how musicians put sets together,
Right.
and how, you got the ballad and you got beat and that kind of thing. So the next week I said, "I'll put this to the test." Because at first I did like 2 hours slow and then picked it up. And I said, "I'll put something to the test." So I decided to, like really, do a little swing, from 6:30 to 7, and the phone was ringing off the hook. "Oh, you're really doing it. I'm trying to get to church. I can't leave, And then, so, I put a lot of thought. I put a lot of thought into that show. I put a lot of thought into anyway, but it was very, it was exciting. Like I said, I didn't have an experience. But my mother always said, she said, "Don't you let me catch you saying you don't know how to you don't know how to do something. Say yes, and then you learn it."
Right.
So I was just accustomed to always saying, "Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, I'll do it." My first book contract, Yeah, I'll do it. I'd never written a book. I didn't know how to do that. I knew how to produce them, but so it's like I had to learn it, and so it's so this book here, it's the second edition of my second book, is more is kind of, I have a lot of my story in here because it's sort of my journey for the past 25 years. The first edition came out in '05, and it was 10 years experience, and I came from a different point of view. um I was more concerned about just getting the musician stories more. There's not much of my voice in there.
You're
And
talking
I
about the first book, you were Quotable
no
Musician.
the quotable no the first book of how the first edition of How to Grow as a Musician.
Oh, okay.
And I'm grateful. I mean, a lot of them, the musicians have died, but I that's why I decided to keep some of their the ones that have died. I put in the last chapter on the soldiers of, because I believe in honoring the ancestors, and the musicians were Al Jarreau, um, uh, let's see, Al Jarreau, Edwin Hawkins, because it's not a jazz book. It's a book of all musicians. Ruth Brown, Billy Taylor. There are like 9 musicians who have passed on, and now sadly, Jeff Clayton has passed on, and he was
Mhm.
like you in all of my books. But the Quotable Musician, that was another one that was fun and challenging. It was a miracle how that came together. But yeah, because when you and I spoke about it, I was like finishing up my manuscript. So I think the manuscript was due maybe a week or two after you and I spoke about it. So that's why I was laughed at when my fax machine would go off at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning and it's like, come on, Bobby, I'm not using all these quotes. I
Yeah.
just need like 3. You went
Well, I
crazy.
must say that this is the Sheila's first book, The Quotable Musician, is a must-have book, simply because it's mostly jazz musicians, but there are quotes from musicians of other styles of music. But
From
it's
Bach to
some of
Tupac.
quotes are hilarious, just hilarious in terms of their truth, what they
Yeah.
speak, what they address. So the first book, The Quotable Musician, did you
From
always have
Bach
in
to
the back
Tupac.
of your mind uh, that you wanted to do a book like this, or did somebody suggest it to you? Or
Well, to be honest with you, the book that I had in mind was to do a book. I've always loved biographies and other people's stories, and I wanted to do a book like in the minds of the musicians. I wanted, because I was of artists. Actually, so I didn't I didn't really have that in mind, but I always loved quotes. So how it came to be, I was when I lost my job in publishing, well, in printing at that point. um it's I got fired. Got fired from my job, so now I'm out of work for about a year and a few months. And so I ran out of money. But the thing is, I always say be careful what you ask for. Before I got fired from my job, I prayed. I said to God, I was so miserable. I mean, I was so unhappy. I made a lot of money, and I was so miserable. I just could barely get out of bed. So I prayed to God. I said, God, look, I just need a month. I need a month. I got to figure out what to do next. I just need a month. Well, God gave me a year and a half, essentially, because I had a major car accident December of '99, and that's why I was out of work. I was out of work longer than the law allowed, and they didn't like me anyway, so they fired me. So when I ran out of money, I said, do another prayer. God answers my prayers. And I ended up getting a call from a publishing friend um, who worked for Lyons Press, because the company, Tony Lyons, had sold the company, and so people were leaving. because he was moving the company, sold it to Connecticut company. And so they asked me to come and do reprints. And so production. So I'm sitting and looking at all these books. And when I was in printing, they had been my client. And they had a series of quote books, the Quotable Hunter, the Quotable Fisherman, the Quotable Everything. So I said to, this was really a Reader's Digest version. So I said to myself, there's no quotable jazz lovers. So I literally, I asked the editor how to write a proposal. I took one sheet of paper, Bobby, just one sheet of paper, 3 paragraphs, 3 or 4 paragraphs, a quotable jazz lover, what the book was, some quotes I remembered from Ellington and Louis Armstrong. I literally, like, one sheet of paper. I went to Tony. I said, Tony, I said, you don't have a quotable jazz lover. I want to do a quotable jazz lover. He laughed. I would have laughed at me too. He said, I don't want to do new titles, Sheila. He said, I sold the company. I said, okay. So my 6-week job, 6-week long job turned into 7-8 months. So I'm glad because I needed the money. So anyway, this is after 9/11. I knew, the job was coming to a close. And he came to me and he said, you wanted to do a quotable jazz lover? I said, yeah. He said, well, I have a publisher friend who wants to do a book about all music, not just jazz. So if you want to write a proposal, write a proposal. I'm like, okay. So it took me about 3 weeks to do the proposal. And before I was going on my first jazz cruise, I got an email from Tad Crawford to say he couldn't open Tony's file and to send my publisher my proposal. I did. I came home November 4th to 2 phone calls and an email. We like your proposal. We don't like the time, whatever. And long story short, I went in and they said, we're working on this new series. The first one is being written. So this will be the second book. We kind of know what we want. We don't really know what we want, but we like your proposal. Can you change a few things? I said, yeah, sure. Okay. Wow. And then the next week I went in and they handed me a check and a contract. And I said, oh.
The Lord works
really?
in mysterious ways. Yeah.
I was like, okay. And I said, well, I've never written a book. So when do you want it? They said, well, if you give it to us in June, it'll come out the following March. I said, my birthday's June 12th. How about that? They said, okay. And that's literally how it happened. And then I for like a month, I was in shock. And I was like, I just got some money to do a book. And that I would tell people it's a quotable musician. They go, the what? Yeah, the portable is that. So I said to a friend of mine, this is how the Bach to Tupac. So he said, is it a jazz book? And people assumed it was jazz. I said, no, Scotty, I have quotes from Bach to Tupac. He said, well, that should be the title. I said, but it's not the title. So it's like, who's on first? But people responded to the Bach to Tupac. So I asked my publisher if they would keep it in the title, and they did. So, and I mean, actually, How to Grow as a Musician was supposed to just be How to Grow as a Musician, but I said, will you please add what all musicians must know to succeed or something, because it's really more about success. It's more about being a professional, just because you don't have to be a musician to get anything concrete or good out of the book. So that's how the Quotable Musician came to be. It was really, and it was I was working at the Newark Museum. I got the book contract. Then 3 weeks later, the Newark Museum asked me to take the job of manager of public programs. I said, well, we'll give you a low full-time salary. You work 4 days, and then when you finish your book, you can negotiate. So I had a full-time salary, I had BGO, and I'm writing a book, and I was completely insane because I had absolutely no time. But I just totally, once I started it, I was completely immersed, completely. And again, I had no help from my publisher. So when I turned in the manuscript, I said, why did you tell me 6 months wasn't a long time? He said, Oh, ignorance is bliss. He said, you turned in a terrific book. I said, okay, thanks. Next one, I'm going to take more time. So yeah, it's amazing how it all came together, but it really did come together, and I'm I just but things just kind of drop out of the sky. I mean, to the point where I was literally I pulled out an album, and on the dust inside, where the album, the paper, and there were all these quotes, and I was like, oh my, I don't remember what album it was, but it's like everywhere I turned, I was seeing quotes.
Well, I remember when you told me about the book, and Sheila alluded to this when I asked her the question previously. When she told me about the book, I started sending her quotes literally, as she just mentioned, at 3 in the morning through a fax machine, and then I remember quotes from all the people I've worked with, like Mario Balza, Mongo, etc. So, but I'm so glad that you put the book out, because it, it's great for just anyone, and it's inspirational as well. Besides being funny, because you've separated everything in chapters: practicing,
Yeah,
performance, etc.
of
Talking about money.
spirituality, of sex, of money. Yeah, yeah. And then I had 4 chapters dedicated. They wanted 4 chapters dedicated to different musicians. I was really, trying to say, let me pick a classical composer. I love Bach. Let me pick, but it got to be so untenable. I chose to just transcribe interviews from my TV show of Ron Carter, Benny Golson, and T.S. Monk. And then I don't know what made me come up with this. I always loved the Beatles. I'm not ashamed to say it. So I have the chronology of the Beatles through quotes as its own chapter, including his aunt, giving him the guitar, like their whole chronology. You can find, and it's all through quotes, only quotes.
Now,
So
I
that was
must ask you this: what do you have a favorite quote in the book?
Oh, I used to, Bobby. It's actually, yeah, I mean, I used to have a lot of them, but I always liked Jack McDuff and that's another thing, because I couldn't credit every musician who was giving me all these quotes. I decided to have a as told to quotes, or told by quotes. Like, so this one was told to Peter Leach from Jack McDuff as they were driving into a barbecue joint. You don't have to be poor to play the blues. You don't have to be black to play the blues. You just have to eat pork.
Right.
And
But
and
you
then
got to like pork, yeah.
and then Lou Donaldson told somebody said, told Lou that Jason Moran had a new CD. I think it was Jason Moran, and he said that record wasn't released; it escaped.
Well, the book is chock full of things like that. But let's go on to this book that's been reprinted, How to Grow as a Musician. Why did you feel that you had to write this book? We've talked about this before, uh, but why did you feel you had to do this? Was it because of the state of the art form and how you saw young musicians presenting it, and you weren't basically unhappy with that, or just
Well, it's a combination of things. I really, when I found out that the first edition was out of print, and I'd been thinking about it. Of course, 15 years had gone by, and I said, you know, because I've been having so many conversations with musicians, especially young musicians who weren't didn't have the benefit of working with Freddie Hubbard or Dizzy or going on the road and certain things, and also in my capacity as producer, the jazz series that I was producing and things. So I interacted with musicians in so many different capacities, and I could see how there were so many things that they were doing that weren't helping themselves. And so I thought, that if I could revise, do a second edition, and keep what I thought was the good part of the first. And so much had changed. We didn't have social media in 2005. We didn't have. I mean, the industry changed. We didn't have, the all these downloads. The radio had changed, and so I wanted to really delve into basically what's happened, in the last 15 years. Of course, the musicians I interviewed, and then I interviewed like you. I re-interviewed some of you and Eric Reed and Michael Wolf and other people to see how you had grown in the last 15 years, what changed, what what stayed the same, how you saw yourself. Michael Wolf in 2005 was saying how he had this great life, and now 15 years later he is survivor of a cancer survivor,
Mm.
and he talked about how he saw his life at that point. So you get to see, growth and change, and some things stay the same as well. And I interviewed a lot of, new musicians, younger musicians, a lot more women, just to see. And I added a chapter called "The Hang." I added a chapter on jam sessions. I Because again, I was having all these conversations, with so many, musicians, and I thought it was worthy to put in a book, to
Right.
to to revise. And my publisher agreed that it was time to revise it. So it's completely. It's I said it's I kept maybe 25% from the first edition, and some of the, like I said, some of the interviews and stuff, but it was interesting. And I also told more of my story because I was able to change industries and you know make these changes and ups and downs, and the same using the same principles basically that I've outlined in the book. So it was great to do. I'm really happy. I'm really happy with this one.
Well,
I
congratulations. We're glad that the book has new life. Tell us like a little bit about how things have changed in the industry, other than obviously we have all of these platforms, the internet, et cetera, et cetera. But in my opinion, there are still some universal truths that hold over from generation to generation. For example, presentation for a young musician.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. I know you have some strong opinions about that. We've talked about
Yes.
you know.
It's funny. I 2 weeks ago I went to Emmett Cohen pianist has these Monday nights, and Leslie Harrison and Alan Harris, performing that night. And I've been telling him for a long time that I was going to show up. So I did, and Russell Hall was on bass. And the
Hmm.
reason why I mention it is because some years ago, this maybe was 2003, maybe 2004. So he's a young guy, so he was a much younger guy. He said he was maybe 19, and I hired a musician to do open up for the reception for the gala at the Newark Museum. And I didn't think I had to give the leader uh, a dress code because it's a gala. Long story short, Russell shows up in a jean shirt and jeans, and I grabbed him and I said, "This is all wrong." And I'm like, it's like, and he's like, I didn't know." And I was like, "Yo, Tom, what is it?" So, but when I would hire some of the young musicians, some of them that I started to give them a dress code. I said, "No, look, you got to show up looking like this." I said, "Because you are now representing me. And I don't want my boss to look at me like, where do you get these people from? I said, how you look is, like you said, they see you before they hear you. And people, because people don't understand, even at a jam session, when you're out, you're always representing yourself. So yeah, I mean, if you're gonna, wear like casual clothes, then they should be like really good casual clothes. You know what I mean? You have to look your best because you're right. They see you before they hear you, and some people don't think that it's important. But also, the thing what hasn't changed is you have to learn how to connect to people in the industry. And I say industry because it's not just musicians. It's not just musicians. There are radio people. There are all kinds of people. There's producers. There's people who write for magazines. There are all kinds of people in the industry, and so if you're not cool, then you might be missing an opportunity that you just never know if you don't have to talk to people. I give examples in the book about some I have witnessed some things people have said to me directly, or I've even witnessed people say to other people, which is absolutely appalling. It's like what? Folks don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to write, how to communicate. You still have to know how to reach out to people, and it's not just when you want something. You know what I mean? It's not just, oh, and all of a sudden now, um, I got a record coming out. Who do I know? What should I do? But yeah, I know I go out a lot. So I used to go out a lot. So I'm very familiar, and a lot of people aren't. But even still, I tell folks, get to know who people are. Who's Jackie Harris for the Armstrong Foundation, who are managers, who are this, and don't assume, and not, because I've seen people just dismiss people who ultimately you might need one day just because they who are you? I don't know you. And I always tell people, please, at least musicians, everybody else I can excuse. It's not actually not in the jazz world, but the musician, if you meet me or meet anybody on VG or any radio station anywhere, don't act like you never heard of that station. Or don't tell people you don't listen to the radio. Please don't do that. Just say, nice to meet you. You know what I mean? Because that's how people are, oh no, I don't listen to the radio. I don't.
It's like telling if you say something like that, it's like telling the announcer or the representative of that station is, well, I'm a recording artist, but since I don't listen to the radio and I don't listen to you, uh, the the person that you're telling that to is they're thinking, well, I'm not gonna play this guy's or this girl's recording because they don't listen anyway. They don't care. So
Oh yeah, and a lot of musicians at various points over the years have been very vocally hostile towards the station, and some announcers in particular, and but that's another story. But the thing is, Bobby, we're public radio, BGO, and Derek Lucas. I interviewed him. I also interviewed Terrence McKnight from the classical station. And Derek says, musicians should at least like come and volunteer. They used to years ago. Um, get to know, go and volunteer at the radio station. You don't always have to be a member, but it seems like, a lot of times musicians tend to be proud of the fact that they're not members of BGO or any station for that matter. And they get mad and they say, well, you don't play us. Well, it's like, but if we're gone, I talked to some young people, they were 30, you know them. And I said a couple years ago, and I said, so if I tell you BGO is about to go under, would you contribute? Well, yes, of course. And I said, well, why don't you just contribute now, like GP, like public radio, public TV. We need all of this to survive.
We're listening to the
And
radio.
as so he said to me, he said, "Oh," he said, "y'all play that old music." I said, "Old music?" I said, "Well, what's old to you?" He said, "Anything before 1957." I said, "Well, that's the year I was born, so I'm gonna take it personally." And we laughed. But I thought, first of all, I was found it interesting that he thought, and he's actually related to a jazz legend, so that kind of blew my mind. But um, the fact that he was 30 at the time, that anything before 1957 was old. That's interesting. And then I realized, I started to meet a lot of young people whose first introduction to jazz was Wynton Marsalis, Black Codes from the Underground. So like each generation, has their mark of what is like that's jazz. That's that. I'm not mad at anybody about it, but I just thought it was interesting perspective that as we get away from like Ben Webster and we get away from Basie and it's like it's very interesting because a lot of musicians, young musicians aren't don't find the legacy very interesting.
I find it interesting too that as a musician, my colleagues sometimes feel that the radio station or any jazz radio station is there basically to serve them,
Right,
and it's a jazz radio audience is not just musicians.
right,
Audience members have different tastes. They listen to the music differently. They perceive it differently. Yeah.
right.
What's the from doing this book? What's the biggest mistake that you feel young musicians make when they enter the field as professionals?
The biggest mistake I feel is their lack of self-assessment. I think that um, their inability to be able to look at themselves and determine what they need to work on, um, where they or what they need to do. I mean, they just seem to not be able to have a critical, an honest, critical look at themselves. Uh, I mean, I was young once and I thought I was great at everything, but actually I wasn't. That's a lie. But like when I got on BGO, I knew what I didn't know, and I knew, or even when I got into publishing, you know, when I got a job at, I had been doing production 6, 7 years, and I got a job, and I was working with some real heavyweights, like the equivalent of Rhonda and Gary and them, but they were like the equivalent in publishing and at that company. And I realized I hadn't had 6 years experience. I had 2 years 3 times because I kept leaving jobs. So I never progressed. But on my resume, I had 6 years. But I was really, really bad. I cost the company, I didn't like it either, but I cost the company $4,000 and for a mistake that I should not have made. And, luckily I had a very understanding boss. But that was my wake up call to say, Sheila, first of all, you don't want to be a weak link. You need to, if you want to be at least like getting towards their level, you have to learn how to do this job. So you know what I mean? So even at BGO, it's like, now Sheila, you're with Rhonda Hamilton and Gary Walker and all these people. It's like you need to learn. What do you have to do to learn? You know what I mean? So that's what I consider self-assessment. But I just find that a lot of young people I meet nowadays don't really have that. They think they know, they've been to school, whatever. So if you can't look and see where you are, Um, and then when you have an idea where you want to go, but if you don't get where you want to go, oftentimes people will blame everybody else. They didn't hire me because I was this, or because they were haters, or whatever it was. It'll be someone else, not, I really shouldn't have approached the situation this way.
Right, right.
Maybe I shouldn't have, or perhaps I should have. You know what I mean? So that because to me, self-assessment is something that is necessary in life in general, no matter what you do. Being able to look and say, huh, I really need to learn more, or I really screwed up, or who do I call? You know. But first you gotta admit that you got something to work on, So I would say that would be, I mean, if there was one chapter, I would say, you must read, I would say do that. And then the other one would be the hang, because it's more explains what the hang is. It's about making relationships. Like, musicians, say, like, I mean, Javon Jackson and I used to talk about books. Russell Malone, I talk about books. I got the four agreements from Javon Jackson, and I make reference in this book as well. So it's not just you learn. I mean, there's so many things you learn just interacting with people on the scene and being able to make those connections that you never know where it'll lead you, or where you might need somebody at some point. And you know
How have you seen the change? How have you seen the scene change? And you could take it from any point of view you want, from the club scene to just the way agents work with artists, etc. How record companies, and I'm talking about like record
well,
companies like Blue Note and others that have the capital to develop an artist. How
well,
have
that's
things
it.
changed?
There are so few companies now. I mean, to see, there was a time when we would never take a CD from an independent, not, I mean, not never, but if you didn't have Blue Note, Columbia, whatever, if you didn't have an agent, people didn't, it's like, it's like, oh, what do you mean you made it in your basement?
Right,
So
right.
because the industry has changed, so relationship with managers. I mean, actually, a lot of musicians don't really need managers at because it doesn't. There used to be a way you could chart your career. You're gonna only do club dates, and you're only gonna go for festivals, and you're gonna do this, or you're gonna work on that. But then all of these things started to close, and clubs started to close, and so the industry is completely changed, and now it's going through another change with the pandemic. But the thing that I used to enjoy in from 95 to, I'd say, 2006, 7, 8, around there, that the scene was the scene. The older guys will come check out the younger guys. I mean, when I mean, I'll never forget when the Clayton brothers were at Sweet Basil, and Tommy Flanagan came, and Kenny Barron, and all, so I like everybody. I mean, like everybody came out, and that was the hang. And then you would go to the older guys' gigs, and the young guys are like, oh my God. And it would be surrounded by young musicians, really holding, really taking in that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would see Ahmed Jamal with Eric Reed. I mean, and then we would talk afterward. I mean,
In other words, you're talking about like a sense of reverence for those who have come before.
yes. And the older guys were checking out the young guys. There was a love. James Williams was. We were always passing each other, going somewhere. And I don't see people are sort of hanging with themselves.
Right. I noticed that as well from the educational standpoint over the years.
Y-
As a jazz educator, I see that the biggest change that I've seen is that before there was mentorship.
Yes.
younger musicians would play with older musicians,
Yep.
and that lineage of passing down tradition and knowledge was
Yeah.
handed off. Now, what I see is younger musicians just playing with them amongst themselves within their own age group. And
Yep.
in my opinion, you can't learn anything that way. I mean, you just basically high fiving yourselves. You need some older cats there looking at you, reining you in, just like your parents would teach you.
Yeah,
And
but see, they can't take criticism either. They can't
oh,
take
okay.
feedback. What do you mean? What do you? How dare you talk to me like that? What? How? What? What's like? What? I mean, it's Bobby. I know. I really feel old now. I know we're born a week apart, but oh my God, it's just like I it's just shocking to me. There's a whole generation of entitled people who I mean really get, and I see it in the workplace as well. They really, you know,
That sounds like a book there, Jazz in the Age of Entitlement. Okay.
now yeah, okay, I like that because that's really where we are, Bobby. It's and then the pandemic, we'll see what happens, next year, how things what goes back. But I don't think this is our new normal. Nothing's going to be like before the 15th of March
I
20.
remember once you came to a concert that a student of mine at the time who was a trombonist, very fine, young, incredibly talented trombonist, uh, uh, on a virtuosic level, technically, was giving their recital, and you were in the audience.
Uh-oh.
And afterwards, you told me something like, you know, the young man has some skills, but I just couldn't get the fact that he was dressed like a plumber on stage.
Oh, I
And
remember.
I
Yeah.
go, you're right. I go, you're right. You're right. Talk a little bit about presentation, how important it is. Uh, um,
Well, it's important because it's what now in the jazz world, presentation is still important. I mean, there were. It doesn't mean you have to wear a suit and a tie, and a woman doesn't have to wear a gown. That's not it. You have to. You can't show up like you just got out of bed, that you didn't care enough to put yourself together. Um,
which
it,
speaks to the when you hired Russell to do this event that was like basically a banquet, and he showed
oh,
up.
Russell, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He remembered it too. He remembered the year. I mean, it's funny because he did actually. I remember that. I remember
The
that.
moral of the story is it's not an excuse. You didn't know. You ask how you. When I
Right.
get
But
hired to
that's
do
true.
something, when I get hired as a sideman, I always ask, how would you like us to dress?
Right.
And some people have told me, "Wow, man, you're old school. You really like." I go, "Well, how do you want us to dress?" You know?
Well, let me tell you, the first time Ron Carter performed at the museum, that was in 2002. So that was my year I started, and it was, or maybe it was 2002 or 2003. I don't remember. And it was like 100-degree weather. The whole summer, it was just exceedingly hot, and to the point where it got so hot we would go inside if it was like. And I said, Ron, I said, come on, man, I said, you don't have to wear a suit. I mean, it's like 100-degree weather. The guys, they have summer suits, and I was like, all right, man, but I'm just saying. I mean, but it's true. Sometimes you do need to ask. um but to me it just, but I mean, it's just having, taking the time to take the time. You know what I mean? It's really, like I said, appearance is important. You don't want to. I think people should make it. If you're a musician, especially if you're a leader, you should stand out. I mean, but that
Yeah.
not
Well,
all people agree with me on that. Some people think I just go a little too far with that.
the money that I see young people spend on sneakers sometimes, uh,
But you can wear
you could you
some.
could you
cool
could buy
sneakers.
you could buy like a three-piece suit, man.
I
But
know, I know, I
it,
know.
but it's interesting. People would, if you care that much about the sneakers that you're wearing, you can care what you wear to the gig. You know, so
But I did point out some of the musicians who, are really snappy dressers, the young ones now. But when I started in '95, there was a competition between Peter Washington and Javon Jackson, Donald Harrison, certain guys like they were gonna, it was like who could outdo the other one, which I always thought was pretty funny. But I tell the story of Victor Goins. He calls me the fashion police. And I didn't know he called me the fashion police until he reminded me of a night at Dizzy's. It was winter. And I totally forgot about this. So I saw him. We were together. So whenever I saw him sometime after that. And he came up to me and he said, "Oh, the fashion police." He said, "You got to be careful who you go to see because you never know who's going to be in the audience checking out that musician." So he said, I went to buy some suits today because of you, whatever. I said, "What are you talking about?" Well, he said that, and I remembered it. So we're sitting at Dizzy's, and he had on, it was winter. He had on some khaki pants and, that look, the dark jacket, whatever. Like to me, summer look. So I said, basically, I told him, I said, "Man, this ain't cutting it. Like, what do you wear? What with these khaki pants in the winter and this?" So apparently, I sort of, um, uh, I was very critical about how he dressed, and he took it to heart. And that's why he said before because I'm sure it was me going to check out Eric or something, and he said before he went to go see him that day, he went to that. So some store always had 2-for-1 sales, whatever. So
yeah,
so that's how he started. So he goes, "Oh, here's the fashion police." I said, "Oh my God."
yeah,
But then that put pressure on me too to make sure that I actually now I always gotta, pull it together
right,
because
right. Well, I'll
I,
tell you,
I
the culture that I come from, being Puerto Rican in New York City and the Latin music scene, the bands always dress sharp. And I give you a funny story. It isn't a funny story. It just exemplifies how the way you, what Art Blakey used to say. Remember, they see you before they hear you. My father took us to Freedom Land in the Bronx at the time, where Co-op City is right now. It was an amusement park that would be open in the summertime. So Tito Rodriguez, for those of you who don't know, famous band leader, famous vocalist. He was part of what was known as the Big Three: Machito and the Afro Cubans, Tito Puente and Tito Rodriguez. Those are the three main Latin bands. That was like the cream of the crop. Well, it's the summertime. The stage is set. You see the instruments. There goes one of my cats going crazy there. But anyway, the bongo player comes out, Johnny Rodriguez, and he's dressed in a powder blue shark skin suit. It's the summertime, close to 100 degrees. He's in a shark skin suit, uh, uh, just gorgeous, gorgeous. And he sits down at the bongos and he shoots his cuffs, what we call shooting your cuffs like that, so that
all
your,
right.
your shirt comes out.
Yeah.
And I'm going, my mouth just went, my mouth just dropped, man. I said, man. And then the rest of the guys come out in the band. And then Tito Rodriguez finally comes out. And he's dressed in like what can best be described as like a light pink suit. So he stands out. The shoes are the same color as this, and I'm looking. I go, damn, these cats are sharp, man. And then they played, and they kicked ass. As handsome as they all looked, the music was just as sharp, just as killing, et cetera, et cetera. So that type of attitude goes a long way. And I got a funny story. My good friend of mine, Joe Conzo Jr., he's a very famous photographer in the world of hip hop. We're hanging out one day, and he looks down at my sneakers, and he goes to me, "What's up with you, man?" And what are you talking about? Yo, man, clean your sneakers, bro. Clean your Adidas, man. You got, you know, I mean, that's
Well, see, that's
hood.
different, and every industry is different.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? It's like,
That's hood culture. You know, like you got
yeah,
your
yeah,
sneakers
yeah,
got to look sharp, etc. You know,
yeah. I mean, look, you're not going to tell Pat Metheny that he can't wear his jeans. I
right?
mean, that's his signature. I mean, so again, um, it's all. I mean, there's nuances. It's not just this way, that way, and again, but
Exactly.
again, understanding the genre, the environment, that you're in, and I think that that's really what it's about. But I mean, look at how, but it used to be important. I mean, look at how Miles Davis, made his statement, and he changed with the times, with his, 70s from that. And, because at one time jazz was cool. I mean, musicians, Monk and them were, the popular, it's popular music, the popular. So I mean, things change, but I'm actually, Bobby, I'm happy to see that there are a lot movies now, a lot more movies with jazz themes in it, the music or the jazz theme, like Sylvie's Love. And you have the movies about the different icons in this music. And and Nina Simone, where's Nina? So I'm glad that younger people are actually embracing these icons and making movies about them to keep them alive. And a lot of people um just don't know. I saw Lee Daniels interviewed about Billie Holiday, and he said, he didn't know, really didn't know much about Billie Holiday before he started doing the movie. And even Gail King said that too. So to me, that's a positive side. The fact that, again, young people are discovering this music, and spreading, you putting it on the big screen, so to speak, which we didn't have so much before. So that gives me hope. I'm not total negative downer. It gives me hope. There's some young people doing some really good music out here. So
Fantastic.
you
We're
know
talking with Sheila Anderson, radio host at WBGO, the jazz station the number one jazz station in the entire nation, and author of 4 books. Her book, How to Grow as a Musician, has been recently reprinted. We're talking about that, and we have some questions from the viewers. Maria Vives asks, "How has being involved in the NAACP affected your artistic awareness?"
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Well, I got to tell you, it was being in the NAACP. I was watching the series on the Black church, and it just took me back. How important music was to the movement then. And keep on walking, keep on talking, walking in the freedom. Like, I get chills, when I hear these songs. So I it sort of, it affected me in such a deep way. The music goes hand in hand with the movement. It's when they're beating on you, and you're, things are rough, and you just want to make this something happen, and then get frustrated, you break into song. So I feel that it to me, it goes hand in hand. I can say that.
We have another question here. Someone you know, Brenda Feliciano,
Ah,
the wife of the great
she's in
NEA.
she's
Yeah,
in
yeah,
she's in the first edition.
yeah. The wife of the noted NEA jazz master Paquito de Rivera. Brenda asks, with all the preparation and research, I guess this is for both of us, you both do to write books and host radio programs. Do you get to get any sleep?
It's funny. Somebody asked me this the other day, and the answer is no.
Yeah, and for
But
me,
I,
it's
I
the
don't
same.
I don't
No.
really require much. No, I don't. I realize I don't require that much, but as I get older, Brenda, my body is telling me I do. So I need to take more time to sleep more, actually.
In
It'll
my
probably,
case, I've become the master of the power nap. So
right, exactly. Yes.
okay. Uh, we have some statement from somebody here. The great Bertha Hope told me once that Elmo Hope used to say, Bertha Hope, a legendary jazz pianist, Elmo Hope, legendary jazz pianist who was her husband, that Elmo used to say, dress for your gig like how you want to be paid.
I like that. I
there's a
like
there's
that.
a quote for you, like for the Quotable Musician, for
Okay.
the next edition of the Quotable Musician.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. I love Bertha. Love Bertha.
And here we have some another statement, and I guess a question from somebody who refused to put their name, but it just says, "But don't you think every generation says the young people are arrogant, entitled? Miles Davis or Tito Puente never pissed. Don't you think Miles Davis or Tito Puente never pissed off an elder when they were young?"
Oh, of course. That I agree. But if you the but is when you hear the Miles Davis story. I just saw the Birth of the Cool the other night. You know, when you hear him talk about him, or when you hear Billy Taylor, talk about the elders. When uh, Art Tatum walked in, Billy Taylor almost lost his mind. When you hear Miles talk about Dizzy, talk about Charlie Parker, it's with such reverence. It doesn't. My point was not. I wasn't trying to trash on the younger generation. That wasn't what I'm doing. The point I was trying to make is that I encounter too many young people. It's not about being arrogant because I mean, well, they're arrogant in the sense that they think they're doing it's what I find unfortunate is that they don't seem to have a connection with the previous generation. They don't seem to have reverence because it's kind of like, you know, I don't need. I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't need any. If you hear anybody's story, after I mean, even when Marcellus was the most arrogant person when in the 80s when he hit the scene and people couldn't stand him. He was saying the most outrageous things about Miles, and I mean, you can look it up and see some. So then they were like, "Oh my God!" But he had reverence for the generation before. He had reverence for Art Blakey. He worked with Art Blakey. He had reverence for Clark Terry. He had reverence. You know what I mean? So that's the difference. I'm not sensing. That's not all. I'm not saying all young people because there are some really talented young people, and I'm still blown away that I met so many of them when they were 19, in college, and now they're, married with kids. It's like, where'd the time go? Uh,
That changes you too.
yeah, yeah. But even Russell, I think he might be 30. So, when I sit back and realize I've known them since they were like, Ulysses Owens, he has a book
Great
coming
drummer.
out. Jeremy Pelt, Jeremy Pelt just wrote a book. I mean, Jeremy Pelt's always been respectful, arrogant, but he's also a trumpet player. That he always says he's a trumpet player.
Trumpet players
So
tend to
no,
be like that.
arrogance is not the issue. Arrogance is not the issue to me. It's just a lack of reverence and connection to the previous
I
generations.
think we have in jazz education are at fault in a sense as well because young musicians have more information available to them now by uh, by simply go, a person who is a freshman in any conservatory or college that offers a jazz program, a person who's a freshman can learn so much information in just their first year in college
Yeah.
that it would take years of learning on the bandstand uh, just by experiencing it.
Right.
Sometimes that advanced state of learning so much information, being very young, and when you're young, you tend to be arrogant anyway, and then combine that with a little bit of knowledge, and then youthful inexperience.
Well,
Sometimes can lead to
Bobby,
a
you
dangerous
asked me,
equation. You know?
right? You asked me about why I chose to do this, and the thing is, each year I was seeing more and more, young people graduating, and again trying to find their way, and I felt that um, the school was teaching them how to be a musician, but not how to deal with the business of music. And so, I mean, I used to go to some of these. I used to go to their first gigs, and I would just take notes on my phone and send it to them. Just because at one point I wanted to hire myself out to just go and critique. When they first started out, because I felt that. So I said, this is unfortunately they're not getting. They're getting the music part of it, but they don't know this part of the business. How do you well, okay, I graduated, now what do I do? What do I
Right.
do? Who do I call? What do I do? How do I, so that's why I expanded, the chapters to include things like that in the book. Okay, so now you graduated, so now what are you gonna do? And then the interpersonal skills is what I really emphasize more in this book. I mean, I'm not a musician. I interview musicians, but I also interviewed musicians from different genres as well, just to see if they had the same experience as far as networking. Mika, a composer, um, same experiences in the opera and the dance world, etc. So I learned a lot too. I got to tell you, I learned a lot as well, doing this book, and also the business side of it. You gotta, if you're gonna be an LLC, or what does a manager do, or those nuts and bolts. So yeah, it's a very different kind of how to. Um, and I think because I'm not a musician, and I have you know a more objective, I guess, worldview. So
Name me a musician that, in your opinion, and it doesn't have to be from the jazz world, but name me a musician that you think represents someone who has it all together in terms of the business side of things, how they present themselves, uh, 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 how they, in terms of the business side of things, how they deal with record company management, all that kind of stuff. Can you name somebody that you would
so
say
I'm gonna
as an
name
example?
I'm gonna name a couple of them actually. The young people, Ulysses Owens Jr., Christian Sands,
Mhm.
Camille Thurman, um, well, Terry Lynn Carrington, Tia Fuller, and I mean, there's actually a whole lot. But Ulysses Owens just totally blows me away. He
Fantastic drummer.
right. He has honorable mention in my first book
Mhm.
as someone who I saw as a young person that had promise, and now he's one of the people I interviewed. He's got the business side and the interpersonal skills and the music side and I mean, it's just he blows me away. Just his ability, he's got all these things and he also helps other people. He's produced for other people. He's constantly working. So if I had to name one, just I'd say him, because he's the most in my forefront. We're really having it together.
And you mentioned three women: Tia Fuller, Terry Lynn
Camille
Carrington,
Thurman, Camille Thurman,
Camille,
Terry Lynn
and
Carrington,
I
and
know Terry
Thea.
Lynn because when I was a freshman at Berkeley, I was a student of the great Keith Copeland, and Terry Lynn was a student, but she was, I believe she was 14 years old at the time. I was 18.
Yeah.
Keith used to take us as his best students around while he would do master classes and clinics in the Boston public school system. He
Yeah.
used to take us, and then we play in trio format, etc. But Terry Lynn, I remember her as this phenomenal talent at the age of 14.
Yep.
She's now one of the heads of the departments at Berkeley, my alma mater.
And isn't
Tell,
she at
tell us,
NBA out here this year? But I gotta tell you, Ron Carter is killing on social media. I gotta tell you, he's so killing on social media. I sent an email. I said, Ron, you are killing it, man.
tell us, Ron Carter, he's
Ron
probably
Carter, the
the most
legendary
recorded bassist in the history of in music in general, I think. Tell us how and he's a senior citizen. Tell us how he's
he's
killing
like
it on social
84
media.
or something. I think he's 84. He's on Instagram. He's Facebook. I don't think I saw him on Twitter. He's constantly either he's posting a lesson or something, or he's just giving a chat about something, or he's promoting himself. Like, I got this concert coming up, here's how you listen to me, he has such a great sense of humor. Because we talked about social media, in the first edition, but I'm just amazed. And that's the thing, in the first edition, I was just amazed at how at that time, John Levy was, I think, 98 when I interviewed him, and Billy Taylor was in his 90s, and how they, at that time in 2005, were totally embracing the internet, which is new. And it's like, oh my God, I can get gigs this way. And, so fast forward now, I interviewed Ron in the first book as well. It's just seeing him so active, because a lot of people say, oh, old people aren't interested and they can't even find a phone, a kind of thing. But Ron is killing it, man. It's a joy to see. It's like I need to take some lessons from Ron Carter about how to do social media.
Well, that's fantastic that somebody who's not only a legend, but he's what did you say? He's 84 now years
I
old,
think he's 84.
and he's like just doing it just like a young person,
Absolutely.
just slamming it on social media. That's fantastic.
Well,
That's inspiration in
got,
and of itself. Yeah.
he's having a good time. But the thing is, I thought about when Chick, I thought about Chick, Korea, who recently passed away, and Chick was so, I mean, to the end. Every time I would see him, and I've seen him before him since the 70s. But even when we would talk, he was always so full of life. He was always like having a good time, like really
Right.
enjoying himself and enjoying the musicians. And you could see, he just, and that to me is, that's what it's about. It's about having fun. It's about, it's not about I'm doing this, because I'm doing this music thing because I want to be a celebrity or whatever. I mean, that, it's just really, so to see constantly learning, and it's just fun to see Ron all over social media. I tickle every time I see him.
I gotta check him out then, man. I'm gonna after I speak with you, I'm gonna go to his Facebook page and see what's up with
Go to Facebook, go to Instagram. I'm telling you, he's everywhere. Except I don't think he's on Twitter, but Instagram and Facebook, he's definitely there.
We got a question here from Dolores Alcalde Mendez. What advice would you give to a musician in the making? What is the first thing they should do financially?
Oh, that's considering I screwed up my finances. Well, the first thing, no, the thing is, you have to. The first thing one would do, I would, if I were starting from scratch, starting over, I would always put away at least a third of my pay. Because the thing is, if you, it's important to build a nest. I mean, if you make $15 an hour, put 3 aside, or always put something aside and start to build a nest egg, even if it's $1 a day, because it does add up. And then because you just, as you can see with the pandemic, you just never know when anything's going to happen. But and also, it's I think, and Bobby, you can speak to this probably more than I. Having more than one source of income is sort of necessary. I mean, some teach and some work. Find a way, if you are good at arranging, look for ways to. I mean, whatever it is. But definitely put a little aside.
Right.
Don't overextend
One
yourself.
yeah, what Sheila just
But
said.
you can speak to that, Bobby.
Yeah, in terms of like diversifying your career, if you're just going to think of, oh, well, I'm just going to play, make a living playing, that scenario is not going to work for you being successful
Not anymore.
in the world we live in today. Only a few people get to do that. The Chick Coreas, the McCoy Tyners of the world, but even Chick Corea, to use as an example, he was completely diversified. He was a composer, he was an arranger, he was a band leader, he was a pianist, he was an innovator in terms of synthesizer technology, and he was teaching.
Yeah,
With
right.
this,
But you know what, Bobby? Also, you have to nowadays. You need a plan. You need a business plan. You need to treat yourself like a business. You have to
right,
have a plan, a 1 year plan, or whatever plan, and just really, it's a new day. Because you're not going to get it just gigging. You're not going to get this way. So you have to sit down and ask yourself, what is my plan? What do I want to do? Do I want to teach? Do I want to do whatever it is? And you say, okay, so how am I going to get there? So I actually, before, when it comes to money, the first thing you do is sit down and make write a business plan.
yeah.
Something I
And I
can
think
do.
the advice that you gave me, that your mother gave you, when somebody asks you, "Can you do something?" Just say yes.
And
I,
then you learn it.
I've oddly enough, I think I've done at least 40 to 50 liner notes for albums.
Yes, yes.
Somebody just asked me one
I
day, can you write something for my album?" And I did. And then all of a sudden somebody else asked me, and this, that, and the other. And it became a source of income.
right.
And
Yeah, me too. But I also had to get a little help in the beginning because the first line of notes I wrote for somebody I shared with a musician, and he was like, Sheila, no, no. And actually, the first MC job I got, I didn't know what I was doing, and I ran it by a musician. He goes, Sheila, it is not your job to just read a bio. It's your job to get the people excited about this performer. I was
right,
like,
right.
oh, okay. It's like, but I didn't know, but at least, I knew to ask. Johnny Garrett used to cuss me out every was at Jazzmobile. That's another thing. I volunteered to do Jazzmobile Grant's Tomb every Wednesday for the summer for years. They didn't pay me, but I treated it like a job. I treated it every Wednesday. I was at Grant's Tomb. I was the MC, and the musicians taught me how to MC. And they
Mhm.
weren't nice about something. Oh, and Johnny Gay, maybe that's what you have to do. So I treated everything like a job, whether I was getting paid for it or not.
Which
So
speaks which speaks to what you're really saying is make sure that when you're asked to do something, and if you say yes, you're going to do it, make sure you do it to the best
learn
you
it. Yeah,
possibly can do. Treat it as such. So if
yeah,
you're asked to write line notes, if you're asked to MC, if you're asked to do radio, if you're asked to play a gig that that's outside of the normal thing that you love,
yeah.
you get called to play with Cirque du Soleil, but you really are burning a tenor soloist in the bebop tradition, but because you have skills as a reader and then you can play flute and clarinet or whatever, and you're asked to play in Cirque du Soleil, don't go in there with an attitude saying, "Oh man, I'm not gonna take any solos tonight. I'm just gonna." It's a service industry, so somebody hires you. Basically, what they're telling you is, "Listen, I'm hiring you for one thing, to kick ass. So
Right.
kick ass."
Yeah, and like how many I know so many musicians who did Broadway and hated it. I know people that did jingles and hated it, but it was paying the bills at the time. While you were good. It takes a lot of. You got to make choices. It's and you got to be aggressive to go out and make a way.
Right. Well,
Find.
in terms of the way I look at things is like I just said, it's a service industry. If somebody asks you to do something musically, and it's not your favorite thing, uh, it's like it's like you're a surgeon. You go in there, you're supposed to take somebody's appendix out, but your favorite thing is to when you're teaching on the university level to lecture on brain surgery, but they expect you to do the job at hand and do it as best as you possibly can because of your expertise.
And
So,
stay in your lane. If
right,
you are a leader hired as a side man, you're a side man.
right, right.
Sorry. Don't try
Right,
to take over somebody's gig.
right, right.
It's like
It's very
it's
true.
like
Yeah, I mean,
it's like when somebody people say to me, ask me a question about something at BGO that had nothing to do with me, whatever. I say, you know what? My job description is host of Sunday Morning Harmony. Anything else, call so. That's my job description.
right.
I stay in my lane. I'm just
You were talking about the fact about we've talked about this in the past personally. Talk about how important networking is for young musicians.
well, the thing is, Bobby, I've made it. I think without networking, I wouldn't probably wouldn't be where I am today. I it's networking is again it's about we're talking about relationships, and I think about when I moved to New York. I was 21, I think 21, 22, and I my sister was here. uh she moved not long after. Had some cousins, but I really didn't know. I knew a few people, but I didn't know a lot of people. But anyway, I you know, got to know some people, and it was like, hey, I'm looking for a job. You have to networking is you have to know to reach out to people and say, or know who you want to network with. If you want to get to know Ron Carter, how do you get to know Ron Carter? If you want to get to know Bobby Sanabria, how do you get to know you find maybe if somebody doesn't know them personally, you find them and send them an email. You say, hey, I'm so and so. I'm interested in doing such and such. You just can't sit and say, oh, I'm sure they're too busy or whatever. You got to go and get stuff. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, it's essential. I'll put it that way. Self-assessment and networking, the hang, it's essential.
And
And life.
it's all in Sheila's book, How to Grow as a Musician. We're getting close to the end. Sheila, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, in terms of your career as a radio host, who has been you said you've interviewed people like Chick Corea, etc. Who has been your favorite interview over the years in terms of your radio career?
Oh wow. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a hard one. My favorite. I can say my favorite during my book. The first edition, Al Jarreau, Oscar Brown Jr., and Richard Smallwood were my favorites. On radio, wow. Randy Weston,
Mm-hmm.
he was definitely one of my favorites. Uh, Bertha Hope, you mentioned earlier. Sheila Jordan, Bobby Humphrey. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I tell you, I mean, you were one of my first guests on Salon Sessions.
That was
You,
fun. That was fun.
dropped some knowledge. I mean, that's the thing. I not only, I mean, David Gibson, the trombone player. everyone has just been so fascinating, and I mean, like I said, I learned so much. You bring in music, and I learn a lot about like different musicians and music and stuff, and just um, but I can't I just love yeah, you know me, I just love people. I love this industry. I love this music, and I can't help myself. So yeah, so I've interviewed a lot of greats, but I would say Randy Weston was definitely the top five.
What about in terms of women in their position now in the industry, particularly in jazz? How have things changed for women? Positively, negatively? Is it going in the right direction? Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of in I must confess I'm kind of in the bubble, uh, because I haven't done in other than I mean I produce and stuff like that. As far as the business side, I think women have always been pretty strong. Um, but I gotta I might rethink that and say, well, maybe not. I mean, if you're talking about on the label side or something, I can't say we'd
Are
fare.
there many women executives on the label side?
That's my
Um,
point.
yeah.
There are there. That's my point.
Okay.
But oh well. But then you have Jana. Started her own label. Yeah. But then I mean, look at Lakeisha Benjamin. Look at Camille Thurman. Look at I mean, I'm seeing. Uh,
The Keisha's fantastic because I remember her when she was a student at the new school,
I went to
and she
graduation. I went to
yeah,
Jasmia's graduation. I went to Brianna's graduation. All these all these graduations. I mean, it's coming back to me like, oh my god. I've always been supportive of these young folks,
right,
and
right.
I would hire them. I hired them. Some of them got their first gigs. I hired them at the museum or at Somerville, or I put them out there young. Isaiah Thompson, I let him. He was with Jazz House Kids because they would play in between. You did Somerville,
Hmm.
and one time it rained and I let the kids get up on the main stage. Wycliffe was the headliner, and that was exciting. And I mean, look at Isaiah now. I mean, just like I'm so proud of these. I'm so happy. I'm so happy for them, and so proud of them.
Where do you think that right now in terms of jazz? What do you think the state of jazz is now? In, uh, aside from the pandemic, everybody's suffering, but the state of jazz as the art form that it is right now, where do you think it's at? Both from
Well,
a musical standpoint and a business standpoint.
listen, I think jazz is strong. It's gonna be strong. It seems like it's not because it's not popular like pop music, but I feel very confident. Some of these young folks are really putting out some good music, and I think as far as a business, I mean, we look, it's jazz. We improvise. We get hit, and then we got to create a whole nother thing. I mean, look at what we've been going through at WBGO, and somehow stuff happens, but we still find a way to come up. And I think we're a microcosm of the industry in general. We'll be fine. We'll be fine.
Fantastic. And on that note, I'd like to thank our guest tonight. Uh, on
Thank
our
you.
first edition, Elena Martinez is over there on the site. She'll be coming on the
Thanks,
screen
Elena.
in a few minutes. Uh, um, but I want to just reiterate to everyone that our guest, Sheila Anderson, is the author of four books: The Quotable Musician, The Little Red Book of Musicians' Wisdom, How to Grow as a Musician, What All Musicians Must Know to Succeed. It's in its second edition now. So all of the things that Sheila, our guest, talked about in detail, she covers them in the book, and she's also the host on WBGO Newark 88.3 FM and WBGO.org worldwide, no jive on the internet. She's the host of Weekend Jazz After Hours. Sheila, what time does Weekend Jazz After Hours come on?
1 a.m. to 6 a.m. Saturday morning. Salon sessions is midnight. Sunday morning, then 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. And I'm back on air Sunday Night Music Mix 8 to midnight. And you can get my book by going to signed copy by going to my website, SheilaAnderson.com. So that's where you get a signed copy. If you just want a regular copy, go to Amazon.
And Sheila answers to the Queen of Hang. So
Queen
if you
of
see her on
Hang.
the street and you see she's across the street, yo, you can yell out, yo, Queen of Hang.
Some people just call me Queen. They keep it simple. I say I'm the Queen of Class.
That's even better. That's even better. That's even better. Sheila, it's been great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, making
Thank
the
you,
book
my
here,
friend.
our first edition of it. And if you've missed any part of this,
You're in both editions, Bobby.
huh?
You're in both editions.
No,
You're...
I'm talking about this show.
oh, that's the first edition.
Yeah.
Well,
And if you've missed any part of it, it's archived on the Bronx Music Heritage Center Facebook page. You can always refer to it and see Sheila, her beautiful face and her great commentary anytime you have access to it. I'm going to turn it over to my co-artistic director at the Bronx Music Heritage Center, Elena Martinez.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That was great. It was such a great way to start off this new series, Music by the Book. It was really great. And I think the best part of it was to hear someone in the jazz world give a shout out to rock and roll. She loves the Beatles. All jazz musicians should say how great rock and roll is. Bob, you like the Grateful Dead, right?
It's an acquired taste that I'm coming to.
I also like Bach.
That I'm like getting more used to, you.
But next month we come back with Music by the Book. Next month we're going to do a little bit more jazz. Next month we're going to have Professor Basilio Serrano talk about his book, Puerto Rican Women in Jazz. As you know, the jazz world, Latino don't always get their due in the history of jazz. And Basilio Serrano's book goes even deeper into the women, the Puerto Rican women who took part in the jazz scene. So we'll be talking about that next month. But also I want to remind everyone, please come back to the BMHC, this Facebook page tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We have our next program, the next part of next one in our series called Voices of Justice, the role of artists in social movements. And it's going to be talking about Black and Brown solidarity. We're going to have some young activist hip hop artists, Aja Black and Divine RBG. And also special guests, we have members of the Last Poets, Abiodun Oyewele and Felipe Luciano, who's also part of the Young Lords. They're going to be talking about the interplay between the Black and Latino communities in art and activism. So please come back at 8 o'clock tomorrow for that. And everyone stay safe and enjoy your evening.
And I'd like to remind everyone also that this Friday on WBGO, yours truly, the host of the Latin Jazz Cruise, will be doing a special tribute to the late, great salsa pioneer, Johnny Pacheco, who has also a stellar career that most people don't know about as a studio musician in the jazz world. So you'll learn all about that, about the maestro Johnny Pacheco. And if you want to learn more about him as well, go to WBGO's website. And you can learn about him through 2 articles that I wrote on his life and the recent passing as well of Maestro Chick Corea, all on WBGO, the #1 jazz station in the entire nation. We'd like to thank Jorge Vasquez, who's running all the technical things behind the scenes. We'd like to thank our guest again, the lovely Sheila Anderson, the Queen of Hang, or simply just Queen, as she says. She answers to both. My name is Bobby Sanabria for Elena Martinez. This is the Bronx Music Heritage Center. Muchísimas gracias y buenas noches.
Ciao.
Good night.